and thanks for tuning into the show that goes around the continent to bring you stories near and far. I'm Joke Rogers at Channels Television here in Lagos, and I'm joined by Vincent McCory from the Voice of America in Washington.
Well, thanks. I'm Vincent McCory at the Voice of America. Happy to be with you again for another edition of Africa 54. Let's start off with the latest from Nigeria. Joke Rogers in Lagos brings you that story.
May 29, 2023 was a historic day in Nigeria as Bola Tinubu is sworn in as the country's president. During his inaugural speech, the new president said the era of subsidy payment on fuel has ended, having not been captured in the 2023 budget. He also vowed to prioritize security and the welfare of the people. Channels Television correspondent Terry Kumi reports.
It's the 29th of May, the day when Nigeria transitions from one administration to another every 4 years. The Eagle Square in Abuja is littered with security agencies and radiates beauty from the decorations and the colorful outfits of invited guests who await the arrival of the main actors of the day, the outgoing and the incoming president. In attendance are the outgone Vice President Professor Yemi Osinbajo, former President Goodluck Jonathan, and former Head of State General Yakubu Gowon, Presidents of Ghana, Rwanda and South Africa, as well as government officials, federal lawmakers, royal fathers and state governors in whose states there will be no handover are all in attendance. The President-elect and his wife arrive and are received by the outgoing Secretary to the Government of the Federation. The arrival of President Muhammadu Buhari signifies the commencement of the event. Straight away, the Vice President-elect takes his oath of office, administered by the Chief Justice of Nigeria. Then comes the man of the moment, Senator Bola Tinubu, for his oath of office.
I, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, do solemnly swear.
The national and defense flags are lowered and replaced with new ones, indicating the transfer of power to President Bola Tinubu in the presence of the outgone president. President Tinubu takes a ride around the Eagle Square to inspect the guards and appreciates the guests. Next is the military parade in slow and quick time. This is followed by an aerial display by the Air Force. The already colorful ceremony is further embellished with dance and acrobatics display. Then it's time to hear from the new president. His speech begins with the unity of the country as he extends a hand of friendship to his opponents in the presidential election.
My supporters, I thank you. So who did vote for me, I thank you as well. I extend my hand across the political divide. I ask you to grasp the national affinity and brotherhood. For me, political polarization has faded away. All I see here are Nigerians. As long as this world exists, Nigeria shall exist.
Perhaps the high point for many is his stance on fuel subsidy, security, and the foreign exchange rate.
We shall reform both our security doctrine and its architecture. No provision is there for fuel subsidy. The fuel subsidy is gone. The central bank must work towards a unified exchange rate. National flag! Peace and arms!
The hearty cheers and 21-gun salute welcome Nigeria's fifth democratically elected president since the return to democracy, President Bola Tinubu, and also signifies the seventh consecutive democratic transition. The president now has his work cut out for him as he's promised, among other things, to unify the country. From the Eagle Square in Abuja, Terry Ikumi, Channels Television News.
Joining me now on Africa 54 for more on the president's speech, especially in the area of security, is security consultant, Mr. Alfred Ononubo. He joins me live in the studio. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me on.
All right, so many would wonder what the president's first assignment should be in the area of security. He has already met, with the service chiefs in Abuja. This Security Council meeting. They've taken a look at, what should be going on. He's received briefings on the situation in the country. So now he needs to decide, what to do, where to take off from his own presidency, what to continue from the previous administration. What should be his first steps?
Thank you very much. I first would like to appreciate the efforts of our servicemen and women who have, over the years, paid the supreme price to protect our properties and our lives, and of course, to keep Nigeria one. I also witnessed the meeting held yesterday by Mr. President and the service chiefs. And I would think that that was a right step in the right direction. He's not been a military personnel. He wasn't coming from security background.
Unlike the former president.
Even though he's been in government over the years and been an active player in governance in Nigeria. But the first step was having the time to be kept abreast with developments in the security spheres in the country. And having said that, I would think that Mr. President would also require some time to digest the load of information that must have been fed to him during that important meeting with service chiefs. Mr. President will also use the time to not just to interact, but to look at options before him. If I have the privilege of advising him, I would also ask that he will have a team that interacts with the rank and file. He will not be able to capture the exact state of the Nigerian security by just talking to the service chiefs. They will give him official positions. They will give him security reports based on feedbacks from the system. But to actually feel the pulse of the security status of the country, he will need a little more time. I will advise that there should be no rush in making pronouncements. There shouldn't be any hurry in taking decisions. The idea of in the past, you see, when a new government comes, they'll flush off the service chiefs and high-ranking personnel. I will advise against that because we're losing investments. Most of these officers have been exposed to all sorts of trainings and experiences and exposures. And once you come in and you clear them out, you've lost a generation of ideas, knowledge, experience that would have helped in sustaining the fight against insecurity in the country.
Right, so many, would also take a look at the president's speech in the area of, creating employment, investing in women and children, which he harped on. He said that that will be a priority. Now, creating employment is very important as, again, there's this school of thought that when you create employment, when you reduce poverty, you also lessen the effects of, insecurity. You take more people off the streets. So what roles should he play here?
I think that we must come to a point we realize that there's a missing link between Nigerians and governance. And this has been the breeding ground for insecurity most of the times. I would describe this or call it the missing link will be the reinventing the office of the citizens. Now, in most cultures where you have effective management of crimes and criminals, there is this sense of citizenship, there is this status that is vested on the people. When we begin to create and accept the status of Nigerians as citizens, what you would have done is give them back the country as their own. Now, you take more care of what belongs to you than what belongs to everybody. And until Nigerians begins to be the owners of Nigeria, nothing you do in terms of addressing the insecurity in the country might give us a lasting result. Because the situations that fertilize insecurity exist, and they're with the people every other day. We have ethnic dimensions to it, we have the religious, we have the social, we have the economic, and by the day, we're also having the digital angle to the crime burden on the nation. And that is becoming very worrisome, particularly with the globalization we are into.
In all of this, the presidency, the political class, the government needs to, take a look at all the institutions around, including, the security architecture that we've just talked about. So, how do we begin to move forward to strengthen these institutions to ensure that they're intact and to make Nigerians feel carried along, as you have just spoken? Again,
like I said, we must reinvent the office of the citizens. It is from the citizenry that you enlist men into the different services and various organs of the security forces. They are not imported from the moon. You don't expect to get clean fish from a poisoned pool. No matter what your creations are, no matter the structures, they must be operated and managed by Nigerians. And if they are coming from the point of bias and the point of, wrong perception of what should be done, we will be far from solving the problem. You can have all the systems, but once it's in the hand of the wrong people, definitely you will never get the result. So I would think that the new government should explore opportunities to reestablish patriotism and clean up the bias that has sustained governance in Nigeria, one of which is quota system. Now, quota system, there's nothing wrong about quota system if quota system is administered on merit.
Thank you so much for your time on the show today. Security consultant, Mr. Alfred Ononubu, thank you for your time today on the program.
My pleasure, ma. Thank you.
We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54 and check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. After the break, severe food shortages in Nigeria's northeast leaves children on the brink. Welcome back to Africa 54. I'm Vincent McCory in Washington. The United Nations says more than 4 million people in Nigeria's northeast are facing severe food shortages as global aid is stretching thin. The United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs took journalists to the region to see the worsening situation. Timothy Obiezu files this report from Maiduguri in Nigeria's Borno State.
This bustling city does not reflect the terror that lurks on the fringes, Islamist militants at war with the government. But even here, young kids are reeling from the impact of devastating food shortages worsened by conflict. Days ago, Bintu Hassan's 2-year-old son arrived at this hospital ward, wasted and hypoglycemic. She says she's already suffered too much loss.
I gave birth to 4 children, but 2 died due to malnutrition. I have 2 left, and this one is also sick. I was referred to this place.
More than 700,000 kids in Borno, Adamawa, and Yobe states suffer from severe acute malnutrition, according to the United Nations. The UN says the situation could get worse between June and September, the so-called hunger gap period when food stocks from the previous harvest traditionally run out. Last year's bumper harvest was disrupted by Nigeria's worst flooding in a decade.
With 600,000 hectares of farmland destroyed, washed away, there will in the immediate future be serious food shortages.
And there isn't enough food aid to go around. This is Ran, a community near Nigeria's border with Cameroon. Residents say no aid has arrived here in 8 months. Kelu Modu says without much food, she couldn't breastfeed her baby and she became malnourished.
When I gave birth to this baby, there was not enough breast milk to feed the baby with, and the baby started vomiting and also had diarrhea.
The food shortage is in part a result of Russia's war in Ukraine and the recent crisis in Sudan. But officials say Nigeria's inflation and recent currency reform policy also constrained people's ability to buy food. UNICEF Nutrition Manager Karanvir Singh says despite crucial aid diverted to other global emergencies, Nigeria is still getting food supplies.
The global package for because of different emergencies in the world is shrinking, but presently we are well placed. But of course, we would need continued support.
Nigerian security forces have significantly degraded the fighting power of the militants. But the country is still at war, and until that is over, millions will be fighting a different type of war, hunger. Timothy Obiezu for VOA News, Maiduguri, Borno State, Nigeria.
After an anonymous TikToker created a song using artificial intelligence that fooled many into thinking it was made by pop stars, experts say the music industry will have to decide how to handle AI music. Dina Michelle has the story.
I'm scared. This ain't Drake.
From the lyrics to the beat to the voices. A song posted by anonymous TikToker Ghostwriter977 sounded just like megastar musicians Drake and The Weeknd. Heart on My Sleeve, made with artificial intelligence, impressed fans, but had some in the music industry crying foul. And experts say it's not that hard to do.
You know, once a computer has a sort of understanding of the patterns that underlie voice in general, you don't need necessarily a lot of data from The Weeknd to generate, sounds that sound like him.
Universal Music Group, which represents both artists, released a statement emphasizing the need to protect artists' music. Experts say experiments like this with AI are just the beginning.
The toothpaste is not going back in the tube. We have to learn how to best live with it.
Fiebring says the music industry will have to decide how to fight or use AI.
Do they decide that it's the best way to make money is to start churning out AI songs that don't have much human involvement?
But the musician Grimes launched an AI voice software, allowing others to create music with her voice, as long as they split the royalties 50%. Dina Mitchell for VOA News.
Russian-built helicopters arrived in Zimbabwe in what authorities say is part of an effort by Russia to strengthen relations between the two countries. Analysts say Russia is rewarding Zimbabwe for not joining with nations seeking to isolate Moscow for its invasion of Ukraine. Keith Baptiste attended the event in Harare, and Salim Solomon has this story.
Ladies and gentlemen, comrades and friends.
Russia held a handover ceremony of 18 Russian-built Ansan medical air and rescue helicopters to the Zimbabwean government at the country's international airport on May 18. Zimbabwe's President Emmerson Mnangagwa said the helicopters will help in disaster response and be used by the country's police force. He also took the opportunity to denounce long-running sanctions imposed by the U.S. and other nations for the use of violence against protesters and political opponents.
It's now 23 years under such yoke around our neck. The process, of course, We access science and technology from countries who are willing to support us. And the Russian Federation is one of them.
Russia's ambassador to Zimbabwe said the delivery was part of an eventual 32 helicopters that will be supplied to the country by 2025. The total value of the aircraft is $320 million. Sergei Chemzov, an ally of Russia's President Vladimir Putin and the chief executive officer of the state-owned defense conglomerate Rostec, which manufactures the helicopters, also spoke at the event. He thanked Zimbabwe for its diplomatic support.
I have to note that Zimbabwe is one of the countries that did not support anti-Russian actions at the international political arena. In turn, the Russian Federation is always ready to give a helpful shoulder to the friendly nation.
Jeffrey Smith, a human rights and pro-democracy activist with the nonprofit Vanguard Africa, says Russia needs allies in Africa and says the two nations have much in common.
They're both internationally isolated because of their anti-democratic leadership and the fact that they're beholden to, oppressive, autocratic, kleptocratic rule. They share much more in common than they have differences.
Some observers say Russia is looking to continue to expand its influence in Africa. Alexander Kovalenko is a military and political observer with the Information Resistance Group, a Ukrainian nonprofit organization countering Russian propaganda.
For Russian, Africa is a very important springboard for a spread of influence, not just political, but also military and most importantly, resource expansion.
Critics of the deal point out that Zimbabwe is rich in natural resources like diamonds, platinum, gold, and copper, which are of great interest to Russia. As the war in Ukraine and international sanctions continue to take a toll on Moscow, experts say Russia will continue to make overtures toward African countries. With Keith Baptist in Harare, Zimbabwe, Salim Solomon, VOA News.
Usually a sport reserved for the affluent suburbs of Zimbabwe's major cities, rugby is making inroads in the countryside where it offers a release from the woes of poverty, early marriages and unemployment, which have blighted the southern African country for decades. The sport is also bringing fame to members of the all-female Zimbabwe Rugby team.
Bridget Magasu trudges down a dusty pathway as she makes haste to attend a rugby practice session at Zimbabwe Primary School in Domboshava, a poor rural neighborhood 40 kilometers north of Zimbabwe's capital, Harare. The 20-year-old is the first to arrive for the training session, clutching a rugby ball in hand while she patiently waits for other members of Zimbabwe's all-female rugby team. Team coach Takudzwa Ingirazi passes the ball around for practicing moves. Domboshava, a hub for transporting farm produce, has also become a hotspot for sex work.
I started off as a tag rugby club, then later developed into contact. The reason being, we wanted the girls to stay away from the streets. And looking at this place, it's a hotspot for sex work. So we try by all means to keep our girls away from that.
Zimbabwe's economy is weak. With the currency in free fall, a Zimbabwean $100 note is no longer enough to buy an egg. Jobs are scarce, pushing teenage girls into sex work, sometimes for as little as $2. Joining a rugby club hardly removes that economic imperative. However, organizers hope it will at least help tackle the boredom that prompts girls to hang out on the streets, where they might eventually be exposed to that world because they need money.
The mantra in the country these days is fighting drug abuse and substance abuse amongst the youths in our communities. So we feel that as Zimbabwe Rugby, we're also playing our part to get these kids to be busy If they're training 4 days a week and they have a game on a Saturday, it gives them very little time to think about anything else.
A few years ago, these young women, most from poor families, had never handled a rugby ball. Now the Zimbabwe side, founded in 2016, are in a 15-team league. 4 of their players have been drafted into Zimbabwe's under-20 women's side, and a few have made the under-18 squad. Drill sessions include running, passing and scrummaging, and for energy, the girls chew sugarcane. All of this is done on a shoestring budget, owing to lack of financial support.
Well, and that's our show for today. You can find all the continent's top news and world news online at voaafrica.com. Check it out. I'm Vincent McCory in Washington. Channels Television has our last word.
We look forward to bringing you another show next week. To remember that channelstv.com is your source for news and other programming. I'm Joker Rogers. Thanks for watching and goodbye.